You're in a parking garage, searching for your car. The high beams of a van flash on, blinding you. When your vision returns, you're on the side of a desert road, the van speeding away. The stars in the sky glow black and form unfamiliar constellations. You need my help. This is a voice from darkness. Good evening. This is Dr. Malcolm Ryder, parapsychologist, here to answer your questions regarding the paranormal, supernatural, and otherworldly. And we have 3 questions on those very topics we'll be going over tonight. One regarding how supernatural beings adapt to humanity over time. One from a listener who's having difficulty sleeping. And lastly, a question about hotels with 13th floors. And, of course, we'll also be continuing our exploration of the Ravenswood Reliquary. In tonight's installment, we'll examine a rose made of diamond. But more on that later. First, let's get to your questions. Our first comes from Ed, who writes, Dr. Ryder, are there any examples of ancient entities adapting to how humanity changes, such as the unwelcome riders being a problem for carriage drivers? Well, funnily enough, Ed, the example you gave is something I've discussed before. The Green River Tunnel family of unwelcome riders were not initially known by that name, as the tunnel wasn't created until the 1960s. But that particular family of otherworldly beings had been encountered for at least 90 years prior to construction. Passing through the Green River Tunnel is Interstate 80, and that road follows the old Oregon Trail for several hundred miles, including through Wyoming. Suffice it to say, the first documented encounters with those unwelcome riders took place as wagons traveled west to the Willamette Valley. They'd appear in the covered wagons of pioneers, sometimes abducting the westward travelers when their particular but capricious rules were violated, much as they do today. In fact, for some time, on a part of the trail right around the earliest place you might encounter the unwelcome riders, pioneers placed the wagon remains of an abducted family. On its side, they painted, "Do not ask questions." Then, about 40 miles down the trail, another wagon had a similar sign, informing that question asking was safe again. I always found it strange that these warning signs were never updated once paved roadways and cars became our method of travel. Did people think that because we had developed some new technology, we'd somehow escaped that which had haunted our ancestors? It seems foolish to deny that these dark threats still exist. We might be able to travel faster down the road, but that doesn't mean that we can outrun the monsters that still pursue us. I hope that answers your question, Ed. Our next question comes from Louise, who writes, Dr. Ryder, I hope this all makes sense. I'm on day 7 of no sleep, and my brain is filled with a consistent fog. I'm so tired, but every time I shut my eyes and start to drift off, I hear someone whispering my name. It's almost as if someone is whispering it in my ear. That's how close it is. Louise, it sounds as though some form of dream parasite has latched itself onto you. These are entities that force folks to stay awake and then feed on the sleep they would have gotten. Eventually, the host, that would be you in this case, will die from lack of sleep. At such a time, the dream parasite will leave your body to find another host. But let's not let it get to that stage. To put a stop to this creature, look for a restful room in your area. These are houses that are built with a particular architecture and words inscribed into the walls. When you enter the house, the parasite will be severed from you. When you proceed into a bedroom, the creature will be unable to follow, and in addition will be imprisoned in the house until it dies or a cryptozoologist comes to collect it. After you've had one good night's rest, the parasite will be unable to attach itself to you again, and you should be able to leave the place freely. So, that's my advice to you. Look up the nearest restful room. Perhaps have someone else drive you there if you're too tired from being kept awake. And have a good night's sleep once you arrive. Hope that helps. And our last question comes from Nathan, who writes, Dr. Ryder, I recently stayed on the 15th floor of a hotel. When I got in the elevator, there was no button for a 13th floor. The concierge told me that was because hotels are superstitious and often don't label the 13th. I was hoping you might know more about the history of hotels and what might have happened in ones that did have 13th floors. I can provide some information on this, Nathan. In a past episode, I mentioned that while obtaining my doctorate, I took an interest in strange architecture and have even visited a few hotels that were built with non-Euclidean geometry and other odd features. The history of 13th floors is of course tied to the history of skyscrapers, as these floors wouldn't be possible without tall buildings. The first skyscraper was here in Chicago, an insurance office constructed in the mid-1880s. That building was only 10 stories tall, but at the time it was a remarkable innovation to build something even that large. Before the decade ended, a 20-story building was erected in New York City, and the first tall hotel, the Hotel Chelsea, was completed about the same time. It was only 12 stories. Interesting that they'd stop at that number, almost as if they suspected something could happen if they made something taller. But then we come to the Rutledge, which opened its doors in New York City in 1893, a 15-story luxury hotel that featured a swimming pool, a rooftop garden, and tennis court, as well as a restaurant, bar, and private club. The Rutledge was one of the last hotels to feature a steam-powered elevator, as opposed to the far faster hydraulic ones. As ubiquitous as elevators are today, they were once considered too slow for workplaces. So instead, they were marketed as luxury experiences in hotels. Elevators were comfortable rooms with chandelier lighting and cushioned seats for guests to ascend the building without having to walk, though they moved quite slowly. The Rutledge's elevator room was said to be especially luxurious, featuring a small gallery of paintings along the walls. Mark Twain was among the first guests. His room was on the 13th floor. After spending much of the night in the hotel bar, Twain stumbled drunkenly into the elevator and told the operator to take him to his floor. The doors closed, and something in the space changed. Twain looked to the operator. He was sure whoever had been standing there before was a small man in a hotel uniform. But now there was a massive figure in tattered robes wearing a pallid mask. Impossibly, this mysterious stranger occupied more space than there was in the elevator. "Who are you?" Twain asked. There was a long silence as the elevator ascended, and so Twain spoke again. "You're not the operator of this machine." The pallid mask of the stranger turned, seemingly taking notice of Twain only then. Twain shuddered, wishing he'd remained silent. Life itself is only a vision, a dream, the mysterious stranger said. The stranger bent lower, came closer to Twain, took stock of him. "I've had that thought before myself," Twain offered. The mysterious stranger continued. "Nothing exists. All is a dream. God, man, the world, the sun, the moon, the wilderness of stars. A dream. All a dream. They have no existence. Nothing exists save empty space. And you. And you are not you. You have no body, no blood, no bones. You are but a thought. I myself have no existence. I am but a dream. Your dream, a creature of your imagination. In a moment, you will realize this. Then you will banish me from your visions, and I shall dissolve into the nothingness out of which you made me." The elevator changed, the paintings disappeared, the walls turning transparent as if made of glass. Twain could see that they were rising through the hotel at an alarming pace. But the mysterious stranger continued. "I am perishing already. I am fading. I am passing away. In a little while you will be alone in shoreless space, to wander its limitless solitudes without friend or comrade. Forever. For you will remain a thought, the only existent thought, and by your nature inextinguishable, indestructible. But I, your poor servant, have revealed you to yourself and set you free. Dream other dreams. Dream better." For a moment, the elevator went dark. Twain could see nothing but the pallid mask of the mysterious stranger, which now stood high above him. The elevator continued to climb, the earth now far below, and getting only further and further away. "It is true, that which I have revealed to you. It is all a dream, a grotesque and foolish dream. Nothing exists but you, and you are but a thought, a vagrant thought, a useless thought, a homeless thought, wandering forlorn among the empty eternities. The elevator came to a sudden stop. The doors flung open and Twain fell out. He imagined he'd fall to the earth, fall from so high up. But he soon landed on the carpet of the 13th floor. He spun around, but the elevator doors had already closed as it traveled back down to the lobby. The words of the mysterious stranger had left him appalled, for he could not shake the feeling that everything he said was true. Had it been a dream? Or was he in a dream now? Or had he merely moved from one dream to another? For the rest of his life, Twain tried to put into words what had happened to him in the elevator of the Rutledge. He wrote over a dozen drafts of a work titled The Mysterious Stranger. In his lifetime it was never completed, never published, but after his death his notes were found, compiled and edited. What appeared in print posthumously has drastic differences from the encounter Twain actually had in the hotel elevator, but the words the stranger spoke to him are left almost unaltered, at least in the denouement of the story. Now, Nathan, perhaps you feel I've cheated you somewhat, because that was actually a story about an elevator, even though it was one moving to a 13th floor. However, you'll find most stories, most true stories about hotels with 13th floors, without fail, involve an elevator. There are perhaps a few tales of haunted rooms on 13th floors, but those are an exception. All others are about the elevator ride, about pressing that button marked 13 and entering some other world, either on the journey upward or when the elevator doors open. And that is why I share this story about Mark Twain and the Rutledge with you, as it very well may be the origin point, the genesis of these tales. Perhaps not the cause of all others, but certainly the prelude, the overture telling us what would come if we continued to build towers and ascend them. And that's our last question for the night. Perhaps it's appropriate that two of our questions featured sleep and dreams so heavily, as tonight in our exploration of the Ravenswood Reliquary, you'll soon see that dreams play a central role in this story as well. Tonight's object we're looking at is a rose made of diamond. Other objects in the reliquary are often there because of supernatural properties they possess, to limit their impact on the world, to keep people safe. But the diamond rose itself is not dangerous. In fact, it only comes into our story incidentally. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just tell you the story without teasing it any further. Sometime around 8:30 p.m. on June 4th, 1926, the whole town of Ramway, South Carolina, fell asleep. All at once. Across the community, people collapsed, with only enough strength to slowly lower themselves to the floor. Stranger still, everyone in the area reported having the same dream that night. One where the town had been replaced by a replica made of birthday cake, frosting, and candles. The people of Ramway trudged through thick frosting as if it were snow. They met their friends, family, and neighbors and tasted their homes and shops. all while joking that when they woke, the town would be gone, as they'd have eaten it all. But when they did wake, all at once, much as how they'd fallen asleep, Ramway was fine, just as it had been before they slept. That morning, the incident was widely discussed. Gas repairmen were sent to test for leaks. Grocery stores checked their stock for spoiled goods. But no immediate cause was available to explain what had occurred. The next night it all happened again, though the shared dream contained different details. Ramway was no longer made of birthday cake, but overrun with talking horses, who loved nothing more than providing rides for anyone who wanted one, while offering stimulating conversation. On both nights, Perry and Jane Edwards, who owned the Edwards Emporium, Ramway's general store, noticed that the compulsory sleep and collective dreams happened moments after their daughter, Natalie, went to bed. And the first incident had happened the night of her 16th birthday. The Edwards asked the town doctor for help. He was at a loss as to what could be the cause. He called the nearby university to see if there was any sort of specialist who might help Natalie Edwards and, by extension, all of Ramway. The university said no, but forwarded the request. Natalie Edwards overheard her parents tell Emporium customers that she was likely the cause of all that was happening. Rumors spread about her, and she could hardly step outside without people whispering. The night after Natalie heard a few of her friends gossiping and talking about her, Ramway was inflicted with a nightmare where all anyone could say were hateful things about Natalie. Only the more they insulted her, the more hideous they became. This nightmare version of Ramway was soon filled with only monsters and Natalie Edwards. When people woke the next morning, they either went out of their way to avoid the Edwards girl and the Emporium, or they especially sought her out to be overly complimentary to her, in the hope it'd encourage dreaming something positive about them. The dreams went back to being somewhat pleasant, but there was always the feeling they might turn into a nightmare at any moment. After weeks of involuntary bedtimes and communal dreams, a slight man with unkempt hair exited a train at the Ramway depot. He wore a wool suit, which was not appropriate for the climate, and when he entered the Edwards Emporium, he picked up a handkerchief that was for sale and began dabbing the sweat from his head before purchasing. Right away, the Edwards did not like him for this. He introduced himself as Dr. Rogers from Ravenswood University and told them, "I'm here about your daughter." "A medical doctor?" Perry Edwards asked. Dr. Rogers made a face as though a piece of sour candy had been placed on his tongue. "Not as such," he said, "but I can be of assistance all the same. If what I've heard is true, she has a fairly aggressive case of sleeping beauty sickness. I've studied all documented incidents, though this is the first in our country." "Sleeping beauty sickness," Jane Edwards said skeptically. Dr. Rogers was not the first person who'd come to Ramway claiming to be someone who could help Natalie. Twice already the Edwards had been tricked into paying large sums of money for miracle cures, only to have the supposed doctors skip town after giving Natalie nothing more than castor oil or salt water. But Dr. Rogers wasn't deterred. He paced about the floor as if giving a college lecture. In the story of Sleeping Beauty, an oft-forgotten detail is that not only did the princess fall asleep, but her whole kingdom with her. And what I found from reading actual cases that truly occurred, as opposed to the fairy tale, the person with the illness, the Sleeping Beauty, imposes their dream world on all those in their kingdom, or in this case, town. And I suppose you have a snake oil you can sell us to cure this fairy tale disease we've never heard of? Perry Edwards asked. Not as such, Dr. Rogers said, but if you... Perry Edwards cut the doctor off there. A snake oil salesman that didn't even bother to bring the snake oil. The audacity. And you owe us 50 cents for the handkerchief. Dr. Rogers, if you truly are a real doctor, I'll ask you to leave our store and let us figure out our issue for ourselves. Thank you very much. Dr. Rogers paid them and left the premises. However, he did not leave Ramway. He crossed the street and checked into the hotel. That night he laid in bed early, waiting for Natalie Edwards to fall asleep. The same day Dr. Rogers arrived, so did someone else, who'd also heard rumors of a strange girl in Ramway. The Circus of Wandering Dreams set their tents up in an empty field at the edge of town. Throughout the day, clowns walked the streets, juggling and performing tricks while passing out flyers that informed all that their circus would be open for business that very night. In turn, the circus performers were told they were unlikely to get any business and should be careful not to be juggling anything sharp or dangerous around 9 p.m. when Natalie Edwards usually fell asleep. Jim Hailstrom, the head of the Circus of Wandering Dreams, expected this response. He hoped for it, as it meant the stories he'd heard of Ramway were true. Hailstrom wore a light cotton suit, perfect for the aggressive heat and humidity sweeping through the area, though the suit was dyed a bright purple so as to announce his presence in any and all places he went. He also carried a silver-topped cane that he didn't use for walking so much as waving about to gain even further attention. We'll make this Ramway girl not just a dreamer, but a wandering one, like the rest of us, Hailstrom told his circus. That night, everyone fell asleep shortly before 9 p.m. In the collective dream, the sky was enveloped by a massive red and white striped tent. Ramway was now in an inescapable circus. Many of the town found themselves dressed and painted up as clowns and compulsively juggling whatever objects were in sight. Jim Hailstrom made his way through the crowded streets of clowns and madness, watching these dreamers perform surreal and death-defying versions of the very acts his circus did in the waking world. In the skies, tightropes crossed every which way, and on them the dreaming people of Ramway treaded as carefully as possible. Flying through the air were trapeze artists desperately clinging to their bars so they would not fall to the earth. The circus of Natalie Edwards' dream did not involve any nets for the air acts. Meanwhile, Natalie Edwards was in her bedroom, or a dreamed version of the space, looking down at the chaotic circus. Earlier that day, a clown had handed her a circus flyer and juggled for her. She was disappointed when her parents had told her she couldn't go that night, but now she was happy, as she hadn't missed the circus at all. There was a soft knocking at her door. Dr. Rogers announced himself and entered. In this dream version of Ramway, he awoke wearing an ill-fitting, brightly colored outfit, like much of the town. He'd tried changing into one of his suits, but it had all transformed into clown costume. "You're the man who was in the shop earlier," Natalie said. Dr. Rogers nodded. "I am," he said. "Do you know what's causing your town to turn into a circus tonight?" "Everyone says this is my doing somehow." "I'm afraid that is the case," Dr. Rogers said. He told Natalie what he'd shared with her parents about sleeping beauty sickness, or at least he had begun to when there was another knock at the door. Jim Hailstrom did not wait to be told to come in. He ignored Dr. Rogers, his eyes going right to Natalie. "There you are, my dear. I can tell, I just can, that all of this magic is yours. Aren't you a special thing?" "Do I know you?" Natalie asked. "Not yet, my dear, but I believe you and I will become fast friends. We're the same sort, you see. Dreamers of dreams." From the air, Jim Hailstrom plucked a rose and handed it to the girl. "How did you do that?" she asked. "Yes, how did you?" Dr. Rogers echoed. "I am, and have always been, someone who's excellent at dreaming. Sure, most folks will tell you dreaming isn't a skill, isn't a talent, but I've found that's always been what I'm best at. So I do the best I can to bring my dreams into reality, to travel and to share them with the world." Hailstrom approached Natalie then and entwined his fingers into hers. "But, my dear girl, you are something I've never even thought was imaginable. You're a dreamer on a level beyond all possibility." Yes, Dr. Rogers interrupted. "Miss Edwards, that's what I came to tell you, as I was saying before we were interrupted. You have a disease." "A disease?" Jim Hailstrom shouted. "How dare you insult this girl's talent, sir, and by extension my own?" Hailstrom didn't know who this clown was, but recognized him as a means to convince Natalie to join his circus. "I wasn't meaning to insult anyone, but you see, in all the literature, this condition is called a disease, a sickness. And, Miss Edwards, that's why I came to speak with you directly, as your parents didn't get the best first impression of me. But I really must insist, you ought to come back to Ravenswood. It's the best place for you, it really is. We'll figure out this condition of yours. Help cure you." Natalie's eyes shot back and forth between the two men, confused. And so Jim Hailstrom seized on that confusion. "Listen to that man, my dear. He says you're diseased, sick, and you're one-of-a-kind talent. He wants to make it so you can never use it again. Now, I only came here tonight to introduce myself to a fellow dreamer. But seeing this scoundrel try to take advantage of you, I feel I should intercede, do my best to help you." He slowly moved one hand over the rose he'd handed Natalie. The rose transformed. It was still a rose, but now one made of diamond. "My dear," he continued, "the choice is entirely up to you. This awful man will likely wake up tomorrow and again attempt to persuade your parents to let you go off with him, to be locked away, tortured, until you are but a simpleton, a dullard like the rest of the world. That would break my heart. But the choice is yours. Do you wish to wake in your bed and have that come to pass? Or would you like to run away and join the circus? A circus where I might help you learn to become an even more powerful dreamer. Imagine one day you could bring the whole world into your dreams. Why, then it'll be birthday cakes, talking horses, and circuses for all. Wouldn't that be grand? Dr. Rogers started to once again explain his position and what he and Ravenswood could offer, but it was too late. With a brightness in her eyes, Natalie Edwards squeezed Jim Hailstrom's hand and said, "Oh, please, please take me away to the circus with you. I want to travel and share my dreams with everyone, just like you said." With that, Hailstrom tapped his cane on the floor. He and Natalie vanished, leaving Dr. Rogers alone in the bedroom, but not for long, as he soon shot up awake in the hotel bed. The rest of the town had returned to normal. Too normal, in fact, as the tents of the Circus of Wandering Dreams were gone. They'd disappeared with last night's dream. Dr. Rogers ran out of the hotel, intent on going to the Edwards Emporium, but the Edwards met him in the street, and with them was the sheriff and a few of his deputies. "That's him," Perry Edwards pointed at Dr. Rogers. "He said he came here for Natalie, and now she's gone." "That's not the situation, not as such. You must understand," Dr. Rogers started to say, but got no further. One of the deputies struck him on the back of the head, and he blacked out. And that's where we'll leave this story tonight, as this one is going to be a two-parter. I don't want to reveal what happened quite yet, but the Diamond Rose is currently in the Ravenswood Reliquary. Along with it, a music box, which also factors into our story. A music box that some have labeled the Nightmare Machine. But you'll hear more about that next time. I'm sorry to say that's all we have time for tonight. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you'll find out what became of Natalie Edwards once she joined the Circus of Wandering Dreams, and what happened to Dr. Rogers after the sheriff apprehended him. But for now, I'm Dr. Malcolm Ryder, parapsychologist, signing off. Feel free to write in with any questions you have regarding the supernatural, paranormal, or otherworldly, and perhaps we can address them next time on A Voice from